product was a differentiator, and it no longer is, right? We can all duplicate each other's products pretty quickly. Not that a poor product is going to compete with a good product, but it's really the market and then the customer experience that differentiates companies.
Welcome to SaaS That App, building B2B web applications, the podcast where we share real-world stories, practical advice, and tech insights for those building or thinking about starting a tech-enabled business. I'm your co-host, Aaron Marchbanks.
And I'm Justin Edwards. Each week we bring you the stories, strategies, and insights you need to build your SaaS or tech-enabled business smarter, not harder. Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to SaaS That App. With me, as always, is my traveling companion, Justin Edwards. Where are you off to today, my friend?
Got to go back to Albuquerque.
Back to Albuquerque. I hope that good times and fun await you.
Me too, buddy. Me too.
Also with us today is Wayne Neal, the co-founder and chief product officer at Founders Workshop, where he has helped, I suppose at this point, hundreds of founders build market-ready software that doesn't just look good, but it works. He has decades of experience leading teams, transforming ideas into scalable, fundable products. And Wayne's career has spanned, if I have it right, education, UI, UX, startups, venture capital. And today he's here to help us break down what oftentimes founders get wrong and what some of the best teams get right when going from an idea to their MVP. So Wayne, welcome to the pod.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron and Justin. Happy to be here.
So Wayne, I want to jump right in. You've worked on many sides of the somewhat round table, I suppose, as a founder, product partner, developer. So when a new client comes in the door, and says, I've got an idea for an app, what is your initial reaction or question to them?
Yeah, it depends, right? If it's a B2C app or B2B, depends on how developed their idea is. But I usually just start by, why don't you tell us a little bit about it and where the idea came from? It depends, the founders, sometimes they are non-technical. And so they just have an idea. And by non-technical, I also mean they don't know how to describe all the features of their app either. They might have this one kind of core idea and, how it might evolve, but they don't know how to translate that into a whole set of features, let alone requirements and how to, build a piece of software.
And I lost track of how many times somebody has come in. I want to make the best e-commerce experience ever. Awesome. That's a sliding scale. Let's get into some nuts and bolts. So at Founders Workshop, you have what you call the 5D process that I'm imagining helps. So would you share with our listeners what that 5D process is and how you have found some success with it?
Yeah, it's a process that we can all, follow in the company and also lead the client through from their initial idea all the way through to implementation and support. And so our first D1, we call it, is the discovery process. And that involves many things. It often, like I said, involves having that conversation with a client to understand their idea. But most importantly, we recommend and suggest and often conduct what we call market validation research. So we will talk to their clients or potential customers or current customers or whatever the situation may be, to really get to the truth as quickly as possible, as I like to say, getting out of the building and getting out of the founder's head so that we can really understand the needs. And we're not asking people, hey, what feature would you like to see? It's more about talking about what problem do you have today, or what problem are you trying to solve, and how do you do it today? And then if we have an idea, we might introduce the idea at some point and say, well, if we had this idea that operated like this, what would that do for you? And so we're not looking for them to give us the ideas, but more to gather insights so that we can then translate that into features and requirements.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's always critical for startups, founders, clients, those in the C-suites, technical or not, to understand how software is a kind of collaborative process, right? And the thing that you wind up with more often than not is something different than what you started with. It's to varying degrees. Someone comes in the door with this idea, you go through this discovery type of a process. And then you actually go through the iterations of developing it. And sometimes you wind up with something that's slightly different or completely different at the end, depending on how that process goes. So how do you coach those individuals to either better understand that process at the outset, or for those that are hearing it for the first time, to not get defensive about their ideas?
Yeah, we walk them through the process. What really works is the research with their clients, because it's real data. And we can present that data, we can present clips of what people are saying, things like that. And it almost immediately settles any, discussion controversy you may have or any bias that the founder has. And we're usually trying to get over those biases, because every founder, thinks their idea is wonderful. And a lot of times it is, but it often needs refinement and often needs adjustments. And what the research really tells us often is what features are more important and what's a priority, because a lot of people want to build, I call it a space shuttle in their first product, and it's like, well, you don't want to spend that much money or that much time. Let's build something quickly that we know solves the problems, and then iterate from there. And so they often, they listen to their own customers and then, refine their thinking accordingly.
So the first stage of the process is to kind of identify what the problem is that's being solved, and then to take data from people who would actually use and or pay for this product and bring that to the founder, the entrepreneur, to kind of validate the idea and also help them kind of drive product. And that's kind of the D1 step. What's the next step on moving into D2?
Yeah, it would be D2. So D2, we take all that information, including our own ideas. And by that time, we had many meetings with the client to refine the requirements or the features. And then we get our UX and UI design folks together to begin to visualize those ideas. And that's where we see, especially founders, but clients really get excited, because it's the first time they're seeing their idea visualized. And we're not trying to, design the final product, so to speak. Our initial concepts are really to continue to visually think about the idea, because it's like, like a lot of people like myself, if you were telling me how to interior design my house, I can tell you, when it's done, if I like it or not, but it's very hard to tell in the process. But because prototyping is so rapid, right? You can put something out there and then refine it really quickly, based on the customer's idea and feedback. And then at some point, we take that prototype back to those same customers. Again, not the exact same ones, but the target or ideal customer profile, and pass those ideas on that prototype through those customers to, again, iterate on the idea, refine ideas, prioritize concepts, prioritize features, etc. So that D2 can take, 1 to 3 months, depending on how much we iterate, how many ideas there are. And it's often an expansion of ideas and then a refinement of ideas into, something into the prototype. And then D3 is our software development phase. So that's when we actually, build. But we're always designing and building at the same time. We're following an agile approach where, as we have some things approved, development is taking that and building it while we're still designing other parts of the system. And then D4 is our deployment. So how do you go from a staging environment where everything is built into an actual live and deployed environment? And then our D5 is the support and maintenance, which we support our clients. But oftentimes, especially for founders, it's building that 1.5 version, or things we learned from our version 2.0. And so it includes those phases as well.
So when do you know that you're ready to move out of D2 and into D3? So you've got your prototype, you take it back to your potential customers, back to the market, and I assume that there's a couple of iterations that happen at that phase. What's your signal that it's kind of time to go into development, into the actual expensive part where I assume most of the money is spent, which is building the software?
We know usually, so from doing this for so many years, I have found that even the best designers won't get things right, you're in your first iteration. But after 4 to 5 iterations, it's pretty well locked in. So you have about a 85% probability that there'll be no usability issues, and that there's some probability that the features really do solve the problem that customers have, and that this is going to work. And then it's really and so that's when and then it's putting it out in the wild, and as you experience real data coming in and real customers interacting, you'll find that other 15% and be able to iterate after being live.
I love that. One other question kind of in the prototyping phase, how do you control for things that are cool that people like, but maybe that they won't pay for? So this is a cool feature, or as a customer, and I like having this, but it's not something I would actually put money down and buy. Do you have some way of testing that as well?
We hold their code hostage. No, we want those cool features. It's interesting. It's often us that's constraining the customer rather than the other way around. And so they're usually wanting to do the cool things, more things, bigger things. And we're trying to constrain it down, just limit the ideas. And I often define, I have this picture of an MVP that's a triangle. You guys may have seen it, where on the bottom it's like functional, usable, desirable. And people often think MVP is you just build a little bit of functionality. But the way I define it is a slice that goes up the side. So you have functionality, usability, and desirability. And so that's what we're kind of aiming for in an MVP. We want it to capture all the magic, a cool feature or two, and the functionality that's relevant and important, so that you get good relevant feedback and can make decisions about how you extend the product or pivot, in those cases.
Do you ever run into instances then when somebody wants to, like, I'm assuming you do, but jump a step in this process? It's like, okay, well, we've done this first round. You guys have done some discovery. This sounds great. I want to go right into design and building.
Yeah, and we've had clients that say, well, you guys are great designers, right? And how do you answer that other than yes, of course? And then it's like, well, then why do you have to do the research? Just design the application. And so in those situations, it's just a matter of educating the client. And we try to emphasize that it's in your best interest, and you're going to be, have a higher probability of being successful. And we are not going to compromise our process, because if we build something that we don't like, it's going to reflect poorly on us, and it's going to reflect poorly on you.
But are there any like particular techniques or secret sauce, underused, underrated stuff that you think founders should be leveraging during that, other than just kind of the standard fare of questionnaire, interview, polling, that sort of a thing? Or is that yield the results that you like?
Yeah, Aaron, our secret sauce is to not do focus groups or surveys.
Okay.
Because
I like that. I'm with you.
Yes, those things are biased in a number of ways, and they're hard to control, and so therefore the data is unreliable and it's hard to interpret. So we prefer ethnography, and there's a couple different forms of that. One of those is direct one-on-one interviews, and those are the most powerful. And so we will interview, usually 6 to 8 clients. It depends on a couple of different factors, but we'll spend about an hour interviewing those potential clients to really get at the key insights that we're looking for. And as you get to the 6th, 7th, 8th interviewer, you begin to see the patterns. You begin to see the insights really come through. And so in a focus group, you can be biased about a whole bunch of different things, or other people, or who's talking the loudest. And so we don't use those techniques. Sometimes using a survey along with the interviewing is okay, because then there's a correlation, and you can look for those correlations and really use the data to refine your features and ideas. The other one is to immerse yourself into the environment if that's possible. So in a B2B situation, that usually involves going on site in their work environment and just hanging out with them and seeing what they do. And do they just sit at their computer or do something, or do they go somewhere else and access other information that's key to system that you would have never discovered had you been in that situation. And the third form is just observational. So usability studies fall into this method where you're sitting people down doing representative tasks with the software and observing their success and failure rate and being able to ask questions. Or in a real live environment, again, it's also being able to sit there and observe people using something like a kiosk or an ATM, or situations like that where you can observe. The thing that usually I emphasize with people is, you guys know this, you have this term UX UI, and they use it together, and it really does a disservice to the industry. And so you really want to find UX people, and by that I mean people that have studied human behavior and psychology and the methodologies to measure human performance. And it's the skill and the knowledge that comes from those practices that you want to conduct this research. Whereas UI, they're typically graphic designers, and they may be really good at interaction design, but they couldn't even tell you about a single research method.
So getting into a little bit more nuts and bolts of that development and deployment processes, you're reading your history, you've led a lot of different teams, a lot of different team makeups, US, nearshore partners. How do you kind of build trust within your organization or between your organization and who you're working with across these like distributed teams? It's not here, I've got 2 developers and they're going to be working full time on your project. This could be somebody in 4 different states. It could be someone out of the country. How do you help people understand that this is a good approach and this is a good mix, and here's how we're going to leverage everybody's skills?
Are you referring to kind of the remoteness of people in the distributed team, or is it the mix of skills within that team?
A little bit of both, but more the distribution of the team itself, and building trust with people who sometimes come in the door with, well, I only want to work with people who are like in your office, like, full time, your guys, right? Where that's gone away, especially with, the time of COVID and things like that. But even before then, remote is the way. How do you comfort people in knowing that this is okay? We've got a great team. They're just not all under one roof.
Yeah. We don't really run into that too much. People don't really, care too much about that. I think we don't serve large enterprise clients, and I think they usually maybe have more of a preference of having people on site. They have bigger teams and there's more, dynamics in play. We usually have small teams of, 5 to 6 people on a project. We intimately get to know the client and they get to know us, and they're interacting with us on a usually daily, basis. And so that trust develops over time, but it really starts in the beginning where, we never hold back our thoughts given our experience. We want to tell people the truth. If that means they're going to go away and not use us, that's okay, but we want to help people out. As founders, many times over, we've seen, the good, bad, and the ugly, and we want to share those experiences. So I think right from the beginning, it's building that trust, and I think they sense that they're getting, authentic advice, and, we lead our clients too. We tell them that this is what we're going to do, and this is how to do it, and this is why we're doing it. And as you begin to work with them, they see evidence of that, right? If you begin to make mistakes and fail, then you're going to lose that trust. But, we build that trust over time and then every day with our clients.
Have you ever had anybody try to put the brakes on, at that particular point, when you are rightly, helping the client understand what it is they're actually trying to solve, and these are some approaches that actually will help them get there, but it differs from their viewpoint. Do you ever have anybody be like, what? No, this is not a good fit for us. It's got to be our way, and that's really just kind of the end of it. Do you ever run into that?
I'm trying to think of that. Trying to think of a scenario where that happened, and I can't think of it off the top of my head. Usually, like I said, it's a conversation, and we tell people why we, think the way we do, and where it comes from, and if they want to go a different direction, then they're happy to do that. But I don't remember a situation where that's happened.
No, that's fair. And lucky you.
Yeah.
It does pop up. Justin and I kid sometimes. I mean, we talk ourselves out of business periodically too, because, perhaps there's something that's already off the shelf, or there's something that gets somebody 50, 60, 80% of the way to what they're doing. And that gives them enough. And, rather than trying to reinvent a wheel, they'll cobble together something that could serve as an MVP and not engage with, a development shop, for example, to do any custom work or even integration. And so that's really kind of where my question is coming from, is as you're leading a client, leading the horse to water, as it were, that may be away from you rather than toward you.
The other side of that coin that we do experience is the founder who has an idea, but they're not sure, and there's a lot that goes in, right? At the beginning of any project is when the ambiguity is the highest. And so our goal is to use methods and techniques to reduce that ambiguity so that they can make the decision to go to that next milestone. And so, Jake sent us a client once who wanted to, he had an idea for his B2B industry, and he's in the industry and owns a company doing it currently, but just wasn't sure. So we got together with him and did a bunch of that market validation research and validated the ideas. And I've seen it again and again after just finishing presenting all the research. They're like, I'll write the check right now. Let's go. They get so excited about the idea because it removes some of that ambiguity. So that's kind of the other side of that coin that we see more often.
So in terms of like the developing and deploying, where your customers are working with their team, with the folks who are actually doing the development, the deployments and all that, what are those communication points? You mentioned that you did an agile process. Can you speak a little bit to how that looks when you engage with somebody?
Like the communication with the client, where that happens, how it happens?
Yeah, I'm your customer and I'm looking at what you're building and I want to change the color of a button, but also I just talked to someone in a bar last night who says that it should do Y, and I have all sorts of ideas about what I want to do with my product.
Again, it's usually a conversation. I'll usually tell them why they don't want a red button, even though it sometimes is required by their wife or someone at the bar, like you said. And so we'll talk through, again, I'll usually present, research that has been done on that. I can find research that has been done and have that conversation. We talk on a daily basis. I know years ago, before I was part of the company, we had a single individual where the client it'd be that single point of contact, and then that person would interact with all the people on the team. And I changed that. So our whole team interacts with the client. So once we get things going, the project manager manages everything, but often the client is engaging directly with our designer in the Figma comments. They're engaging directly with the developer when something doesn't work and they found an error or something like that. And then, they're having that discussion. And usually it depends on the client. Each client has a different preference for communication. And we'll ask that early on during the discovery session. We'll ask people about, whether or not they want to really be involved intimately in every aspect of every decision, or whether they kind of prefer more the weekly check-in and that kind of thing. But often our clients will want to be much more engaged, and they're engaged on a daily basis, meeting weekly to review progress, that kind of thing. We also have staff augmentation clients, and so in that case, we put individuals on their teams, and so they're managing the project and managing that, and so in those cases, they're interacting directly with the individual.
Cool, makes sense. I think that that communication between the people doing the work and the people having the vision is super key. We do a similar thing. Some customers really want a single point of contact, in which case we can accommodate that, but it's in general much smoother, and we have many fewer issues with communication and redoing work if we can get the people doing the work in the room with the person who's dictating how it should work. So it's one of our learnings as well. Completely agree.
Yeah, if you do it long enough, you realize, right, that's the better way to do it.
So the application is deployed, and I know, and we have also talked to folks that are like, this is great. I'm now going to go disappear and raise funds around this, or I'm going to go, kick the tires on it for 6 months to a year and then come back. One, do you see that type of a thing happening? And two, how do you go about talking them out of it, as it were, since software is living and breathing, especially after an initial launch?
We don't see that too much. We have a customer called Buzzy, Buzze, that they launched a application to charge electric vehicles out of people's homes. So you can decide to set up a charger in your home and then rent it out to cars that want to come and charge. And so they built the initial MVP. They pivoted a little bit from like consumer and houses to large apartment buildings, and they're getting a lot of traction. They're raising money, but they are, as they do that, they run into new requirements, right, and new ideas, and so they do come back to us and either want us to continue to develop or enhance those requirements, or in some cases, a lot of clients will switch from, a project team to a staff aug team. So as they raise money, as they get traction, they'll start to bring that in-house a little bit, augment that team with our folks, and at some point, switch maybe to an all in-house team, which we've seen that as well. So we try to live along with the clients and kind of meet them where they are, and it tends to work out well.
Oh, that's great. No, I love that, the notion of staff augmentation. You always get into, since your business is software based, it would make sense that you actually had somebody in-house on your team that understood software, that could at the very least do the hot button urgent, quick fixes that might be needed as you're planning out your roadmap. And I think it's something that often gets overlooked, is over the course of a process, is I need to continue to budget for maintenance, and maybe that maintenance budget turns into a human being.
Yeah, it could. And it's interesting too. We have one client who literally invented and is the godfather of CRM. And I won't mention his name, but he's building another application, and he's hired our staff augmentation folks, and he's like, I don't think I'll ever need to hire an internal team, because along with that comes larger pay and benefits and all these, and managing people when they just want to get the work done. And, as long as we're delivering consistently, and those people are living in their world, so it's very much like an employee without all the so-called baggage of having to hire someone internally. And so he had that revelation. And, as long as, now he's been in the software industry for 50 plus years, so has a very strong vision and understanding of software and what he wants and needs and how software works. And in that case, this scenario, I think, works well for him. So
definitely had that early on with some customers who wanted to hire people all over the US and make a great product with a great team. And it's like, oh, do you want to pay tax in Ohio and Missouri and Seattle and California? And it's, you got like 25 quarterly filings you're signing yourself up for, and you're not big enough to have a department that handles that. So you're going to do it. And if you don't love that, maybe consider a different approach.
Right. Exactly. Well, and it used to be that, product was a differentiator, and it no longer is, right? We can all duplicate each other's products pretty quickly. Not that a poor product is going to compete with a good product, but it's really the market is where the definition and the customer experience that you can build is what differentiates companies. And so, maybe this guy knows something,
So stepping back now, big picture, we kind of worked through the D's, as it were. So a couple of different things I want to hit on here. There has been, and you mentioned this much earlier in the podcast, so I'm kind of wanting to come back to it, but I'm trying to frame it as a question. You kind of talked about the triangle. You talked about this notion of, build stuff fast, get it out to market, fix it later, kind of an approach. And I think that we've probably hit it at various points along the way, but if you could wrap it up with a bow, why is it that type of an approach is not great?
Why is building things small and quickly and getting it out in the market not a good approach?
Yeah, build it fast, build it ugly, get it out the door, and then we'll address it and fix it along the way.
Basically, in the pie example you gave, taking only that bottom tier as opposed to having a slice of the whole thing.
It depends, right? I've seen a lot of technical developers that can code. They just want to code something really quickly and get it out there, and they miss the other parts of the pyramid. And so they're not getting the feedback that they need, or or the feedback is kind of non-existent, or, it's really, really silent, because they're not getting any feedback because they're not addressing those other human needs other than just the functional piece of the application. But I do believe it's really threading the needle, I think, in defining that MVP, like what is enough to get that reaction and to get the learning, and the product's certainly going to be inefficient, right? Especially if it's competing with something that's already in the marketplace. So you do have to do something a little special, a little different, to be able to get that reaction and to get that validation to keep going versus, this is not the right thing. So I sort of do believe I very much believe in building small and fast and getting it out there. But it doesn't mean that you don't do the research, right? You still talk to customers, you get those insights, you make sure that you're solving real world problems. And if you're solving someone's problem, either saving time, saving money, or, complying with something to keep them out of jail, then you're gonna get, traction. And so I do believe in that. But some people can go too fast, and I don't know if this is what you're getting at. They kind of rush and go too fast and build something.
Wind up cutting corners, or
and
there's just this notion of, whatever it is can look terrible, and as long as it works real quick.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's where it's missing that human experience, right? And so we've very much followed that human-centered design philosophy and experience, and the technology needs to meet the experience rather than the other way around. And so we let the experience drive development rather than technology.
So one more kind of big picture question, then I'll wrap us up. But having talked all the way through this, and I'm sure that you have different examples for different circumstances and such, but even if you needed to group them together, where would you say then that most teams or founders or developers or startups go wrong between their idea and the MVP? Somewhere along that spectrum, where would you say most of the time it goes wrong, if it's going to go wrong?
Most of the time, in my experience, is they focus on the minutia. They focus on, every little detail, and they try to build too much rather than focusing on their customer and solving a real problem. I think that is the nail on the head.
You said a lot with that statement.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
We could dig into that for another hour, but yes.
Absolutely. Well, where can folks find you, or where can folks connect with you, either online or?
Yep, they can find me on LinkedIn personally under my name, Wayne Neal, Neale, or foundersworkshop.com.
Awesome. Wayne, it has been a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your time and your talents. We've been talking with Wayne Neal, co-founder and Chief Product Officer, at Founders Workshop. Special thanks, as always, to my traveling partner over here, Justin Edwards.
I'm off to the airport.
Off to the airport now. So we'll get him out the door. Thanks, as always, to our listeners as well. We'll see you all next time on SaaS That App. Thanks for cruising along with us on SaaS That App. We hope you grabbed some insights that were inspiring, actionable, or at least entertaining.
If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
Until next time, keep building, keep growing, and keep those apps sassy.